All right, welcome back to D in the Cloud. Now today I'm going to be exploring IAM management and access controls. So let's jump into it. This should be a quick, fun little lab to do. The first thing I'm going to do here, now that I'm set up, I'm in my management console. I'm going to first go ahead and search for the IAM service. I have it down here. You can also type it up here. But click IM. And once that opens up, we're gonna go ahead and look at some users that have been created in this IAM user account. So we'll go ahead and see the users. This is great. You have users who are uh, particular individuals. Those individuals can be clumped together to make groups, and then roles as well can be used by outside entities outside of the account that have permission to do a particular process for us. So we're looking at our users here. We have a total of 5 users, it looks like, and user 1, 2, and 3. So we're going to look at user 1. And so as you could see, uh, we have to get some permissions for this user. So uh, they don't have any permissions yet, so we can go into groups. And we mentioned before that groups are made up of users, so we can make group policies and add users to the groups, and then any policy that is in the group, the user inherits automatically. So it makes it really easy for us to push a lot of users out pretty quickly and onboard, offboard, switch roles and switch user permissions pretty quickly using groups. So we'll click on groups and then user one is also not a member of any groups. So let's look at the security credentials. Does user one have any security credentials? And so we see here that the console password has been enabled. So we know that this user does have a password, is able to log into the console. They don't have any permissions within the console. So let's go over here to this navigation panel and let's look at the groups. Now you can see we have a few groups here as well. We have an admin group, a support group, we have a read-only group, and then we have another support group for S3. We have an S3 support group and an EC2 support group, and then an EC2 admin group. So let's look at the EC2 support group, and under this we'll go ahead and take a look at the permissions that are in the EC2 support group. And look, we have a policy name, Amazon EC2 read-only access. So this is a pre-built policy built by AWS, or it could also be built by the administrators of the AWS account that is being used, and it can be attached to IAM users and groups. When the policy is updated, the changes to the policy are immediately applied. So that is great. I mean, we can have all the necessary changes for all the users that we need to change done pretty quickly by just updating this one policy. So again, streamlining the work makes it really efficient, makes for less room for error, and overall, just a better experience for us and the users. So over here, we can look at the show policy section under actions. And basically, a policy is just a set of permissions that are defined. It defines what actions you can and cannot do with a particular AWS resource. So the policy is granting permission to list and describe information about the EC2. So here we got, so as you can see here in this policy, it's written out to allow, right, the effect of this particular object in the policy is to allow EC2 to describe, basically allow us to see the information. It doesn't allow us to make any changes to the information, but we are able to view, so it'll list and describe the information here about the EC2 instance. And next we can look at the elastic load balancing. Again, it allows us to describe, or it describes for us what's going on in this EC2 instance. In other words, it lists what's happening in this EC2 instance or this elastic load balancing instance. However, we aren't able to make any changes to it. And finally, we also see that there's list metrics for the CloudWatch. It allows us to list them and view them, and then also for our auto scaling as well, so we can look at what's happening in our auto scaling to view. So these are basically really ideal um, policy for support roles where we don't necessarily want changes to be made, but we do want the support person to be able to view what's happening or what's available to uh, in that particular uh, service within AWS. So what we see here is the basic structure of an IAM policy. So you do have the effect, which is basically allow or deny. It could either be to allow this to happen or deny this to happen, and the action, which is basically an API call that's made against the AWS service. So in this case, the API call is EC2 describe. So we're allowing EC2 to describe, and then which resource that we're going to use. This defines the scope of the entities that are covered under the policy. And so you could be very specific here, and let's say there's a specific EC2 instance that you want this particular support role to be able to look into, then you can list that here. When we use the asterisk, the wildcard, it gives permission to any resource that falls under the EC2 branch of services. All right, so we'll close this out now. Well, let's look at another policy in the S3 group. So we had that S3 support group. Let's take a look at this policy here. And we can see that we have read-only access on Amazon S3. So let's take a look at the policy. And we can see that this policy has permission, right? So the effect is allow. The action is the API call, which is to get and list S3. And then the resource is open. So we can look at all S3 resources within this account, and we can get and list the S3 data that's in that account. Okay, so let's take a look now at the last group, and that's this EC2 admin group. And what you can notice here is a little different than the last two we looked at. Instead of a managed policy, we have inline policy here. And so what an aligned policy is, it basically is a one-off situation. It's where we give permission that applies, but we're not applying it on necessarily on an ongoing basis. It has a permission to do a particular task, a particular thing, and then we can terminate it or stop it. So in this particular case, we can go ahead and let's edit this policy. And so as we look at this policy, we see again the same structure. We have the action, and then we have the resources and effect, and it's in a different order, but we have the same elements. So this policy allows EC2 instance to be described. It also gives permission to start an instance and stop an instance, and that's any instance. So this permission is pretty powerful in that it can shut down our instances, or the person who is using this policy, or the entity using the policy can actually stop and start any of our instances within our AWS group. So why don't we go ahead and just hit cancel. We're not going to make any changes to that. Just wanted to take a quick look at it. And that is where you could make changes if there were changes that you wanted to make. So, some business scenarios are really why we actually have these permissions. So, let's take a look at an ideal situation where we have a company's growing in moving its services to AWS. It's using more AWS services. It's using more instances. It's using more S3 storage, and we need to onboard new staff. So we're going to give permissions to that staff based on their role, what they're going to be doing for. So user one is let's say user one is now coming in, got hired, and their role is to support S3, Amazon S3. So we need to add them to the S3 support group, and then they can inherit the necessary permissions via the attached Amazon S3 read-only access policy. So let's go ahead and add that user now. So we'll go back to groups. We're going to go ahead and look at the S3 support, and then we'll click on users. And now here we could just add a user to the group, and we're going to add user 1 to this group, and we're going to go ahead and click add users, and there you are. Now that user has been added to the group with the permissions that are necessary to support S3 the way the company wants that person to be able to support S3. And anybody we add into this group will have those permissions added to their AWS account. All right, so let's add another user to another group. So let's say that we hired user 2 to support EC2 groups. Uh, he or she's been hired to help provide support for Amazon EC2. So it makes sense. Your job is to help with EC2 support. So we're gonna add you to that group. This is gonna just be a couple of clicks, and the policy is already provided. Therefore, boom, just like that, we have them set up. And then we have a third person who is going to be our added to the team, and they are the EC2 administrator, and they're going to manage our EC2 instances. So we'll go back to groups, and we'll give them the proper permissions by going into that group, adding a user, adding user 3, and there we go. Now, user 3 has the permissions they need for to administer EC2 instances uh, for the job that they were hired for. And so now when we come back here to the groups section, we should see that every group it now has one user. So That is how we can have a high level, quick view of quick check of what we expect to have versus what we actually have in our group. And then we can actually go ahead and check on some sign in, and we can go in and sign in and actually test some users. So over here on the dashboard, we we can go back to the dashboard and we'll be able to uh, get a sign in link for the IAM users. So let's go ahead and sign into those accounts and see how those permissions actually played out on the user side. So for here, we can just go ahead and click. We'll log in uh, as one of the users. We'll open up incognito page here, paste and go, and I'll just go ahead and log in as the user. All right, so we're here logged in as user one, and we'll go ahead and look at the now that user was hired as the S3 storage support staff. So we'll go ahead and look at the S3 service and see what those permissions allow that user to do, or this user to do. Okay, so we have a few buckets here. Let's take a look at one of these buckets and let's see what it looks like. Because they're part of that group that we gave them, they're able to look at the list of what's going on or the list of buckets that we have, and we're also able to see all the contents of that bucket as well. So we can look through the properties, permissions, we can look at everything because we have access to these buckets. The only thing that we were not able to do, as you can see, we're not able to make any changes to the buckets. So let's log out. Let's look at another user. Before we do that, let's go back actually and double check to see the difference here. Now we gave them S3 permissions, but they should not have EC2 permissions. So let's make sure that that is accurate. So let's go back to our services section. And let's click here on EC2. And now that we're in our EC2 console, we can click instances and we should not be able to see any instances. So it's fetching, it's fetching, it's fetching, but there are no instances to show. And the reason for that is because we don't have permission to see these instances, and so that is being blocked for this user. All right, so now we'll go ahead and sign out and then sign back in as the next user and see what their permissions look like. So now this user was hired to work on EC2, so we should go now to the EC2 panel, and we should be able to take a look at the instances, and those instances should appear. See, so we have this here, and this instance is here. So same AWS account, different users, different permissions, giving access to see different services at different levels. So if we click here and we go to actions and we go to state and we go to stop, we click yes, stop, and we have this error here. Why? Because this person's or this user has the permission to view, but not the position to stop or start. We didn't add those permissions. That was the admin permissions, but this person is not in the admin group. They're in the support group. So access denied, again, just access security, making sure that the right users have the right access and are able to do the right things. So, last but not least, we can log out of this user's account and we'll log into user 3 and actually see how that works. So we'll log back in. Under user 3, and we'll go right to EC2, and because this user has the permission not only to see but also to start and stop uh, that these instances that are a part of this account, then we should be able to stop this instance with this account and with no trouble. So we'll go action state stop. Are you sure you want to stop? Yes, we're sure we want to stop. And now we are actually able to stop this instance with this user 3. So hope that was helpful. It's really great to use IAM permissions. Policies help to really define how well we are actually protecting the services and the AWS account, as well as making sure that there are checks and balances so that people can't make mistakes that are unnecessarily um, unnecessarily given to them to make. So, with that, I will jump back in my cloud mobile, and I hope that you are enjoying IAM permissions. Make sure you use them and thoroughly define your policies. Take time, think them through, and other than that, I will see you in the next one.